faith, business, legacy. Welcome to Strategies for Success.
Welcome back to Strategies for Success. My name is Tyler.
I'm Travis.
And this week we're continuing on with the Discipline Month. Today's topic, we're talking about emotional control under pressure. So we're going to lead off with the scripture, and it's from Proverbs 25:28. A man without self-control is like a city broken into. It's talking about self-control, controlling your emotions when you're under pressure.
Man, this is the tough one. It is tough. Out of all the stuff, you know, you try hard. You always want to live a life that would be the pleasing to God, and I want to be that example of what a godly man looks like, especially with my boys. But I'll tell you what, it's not always easy being in control of your emotions. Sometimes that turns into verbal, and sometimes it turns into physical. But it's not easy. I want to read something to you. This is one of the stories that I've laid out with these weekly podcasts, and man, this one really hit home. There was a moment where everything was on the line. The pressure was high, the people were watching, the outcome mattered, and in that moment, he lost control. Words came out that shouldn't have. The tone shifted. The leadership slipped. And the situation didn't fall apart because of the problem. It fell apart because of the response. Moses led millions, saw miracles, spoke with God, but one moment of pressure, one emotional reaction, and instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it, and it cost him the promised land. Pressure doesn't create who you are, it just reveals who you are.
Wow.
That's tough, man. I've thought many times, you know, can you imagine the pressure of leading God's people and all the time the complaining, the griping, they need food, he prays, God delivers manna from heaven, and within, a short period of time they're griping and complaining about the manna.
They forget what just happened.
Yeah. And it's always easy to be like, you know what, if I was in this situation, I'd do this. But exactly what that said at the end, it reveals who you are when you're put under pressure. One time, I've never been one of those guys that get worked up too much about fighting with somebody. Now, I get worked up when I put pressure on myself when it comes to deadlines and getting stuff done. A lot of times I'm always telling my boys, hurry up, we got to get this done, hurry up. And my youngest son, Tanner, he's always asked me, Dad, is there a specific reason like why we're in such a big hurry? And I have to catch myself and realize, yeah, they're probably really not, but I put that pressure on myself. But I've never been one to really be physical and want to get into a fight with somebody over something like that. And so there was a few years back, we had a guy come in for service, and he was upset about a repair from a few years back. I didn't know who this individual was, but he kept pulling up into our service bays, and I was like, what in the world is going on here? And I'm not talking like walking up into the service base. I'm talking like driving into the service base. And so I waited, and I tried to find this guy, and I'd see his truck, and I could never find the guy. And about the third day, I saw him back there, and I walked back and I said, hey, I said, sir, if you don't mind, if you could park over there in the customer parking and come in the office, and you can talk to, I don't want to talk to people at the counter, Oh, well, okay. Can I help you with something? No, you can't help me. And names started being called, and I try to teach our people that, it's one thing when someone comes in and they're mad about their situation, or they're mad about their equipment being broken. That's pretty normal, but it's something altogether different when they cross that line and then they start getting personal,
Yep.
calling you names, telling you, you're an idiot or whatever. And nobody likes that. And so I'm standing there, I'm just letting this guy vent. I've learned that's the best thing to do with a lot of these situations. And he's getting madder and madder, even though I'm not even saying anything. And he reaches over there and he starts poking me in the chest. And I wanted so bad. If you guys haven't met me in person, I'm not a little guy. I'm 6'7", about 335 pounds, and so some of my heroes like Haas Cartwright off the old TV show or whatever, or Big Bad John. Those guys were little guys compared to me. And but I think that's always helped because I've never really felt like I had anything to prove. And so this guy's poking me in the chest, but in this moment, I just wanted to grab his hand, and squeeze it. And finally, I started taking deep breaths. And I've been in several of these situations before, just under your breath, you're like, dear God, just give me the strength, give me the strength, give me the strength to just stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. And sometimes you got to walk away and take a deep breath. And, thank goodness, because I stayed calm, the situation didn't escalate. But back to that about Moses, can you imagine? The rock was to represent Christ, living water was to come out. This was the one moment that you didn't want to make a mistake. And he lost his patience, and he smote the rock, and water came forth. God went ahead and brought forth water, but he wasn't able to enter the promised land. And I think we need to think a lot about that, hey, what is this moment here? How am I reacting? How is this, how am I responding? Am I doing what I need to be doing? And remember and I'm probably showing my age here, but several years back, you'd go in the Bible bookstore and they'd have these armbands that would say WWJD. And they were to remind you, what would Jesus do in that situation? And so that's what I do a lot, maybe not looking at an armband, but I think to myself, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Because I don't want to respond like Travis might respond. I want to respond like Jesus.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people's initial response is going to be emotional.
Yeah.
So I think if you can step back from the situation and take a couple deep breaths or have a little bit of time to think about things. I naturally like to think about things a little bit more before I make a decision, like a big decision that, especially if someone's angry or whatever, I think if you can escape from the situation just for a moment or whatever, sometimes if someone gets mad on the phone call, you can let them vent a little bit. Sometimes you may be able to call them back and try to come up with a plan and call them back, but at least that gives everybody time to calm down. So it's not just emotional things going on. You actually try to use the rational part of your brain and come up with some real plans, because just like Moses, if you do lose your cool in one situation, that can really be damaging to you, really can be damaging to your character, what people see from you. If you're in, not even if you're in a leadership position, but just any position at all. If you see someone escalates the situation, you escalated to the same amount or even higher, then, there's a lot of times people, when they see that going on, that's what they're going to remember is you screaming or whatever you did.
I mean, I'll share this with you, and I try to be, I want these to be personal. I want you to know that I wish I could tell you that, man, I'm successful and I do everything just right, but that's not the case. And I think that's one of the first steps to becoming successful is realizing that you're not perfect and that you do make mistakes. But I never realized this about myself. Tyler actually shared it with me. He said, man, he said, you could really get on and some of these things where people are, promoting merchandise because you get excited about stuff. And then what do they call that? An influencer?
Yeah,
is that what it is?
An influencer.
Yeah. So I didn't realize this, but I got asked to speak at one of our regional meetings for our business, and it was about the new lawn and garden products and how we're doing service and different things. And so I was really excited about the process, and I went and shared it. And one of our new sales guys that we had there, I was the service manager, and I went and I shared this. Man, I was so excited. I shared how this process, I spoke the program that I believed in, and went through the whole thing. And I didn't realize it, but our sales guy back there was like hanging on every word. And he was like ready to charge hell with a water pistol by the time I got done. And I didn't realize that this was a benefit or like even a I guess you would say a skill.
Yeah.
And I got back to the store, and he was like hanging on every word about this service process and how we're a team and all this. And then it got down to one day that was a hot day, and I'd had about 3 customers wanting a piece of my tail, and he come back there and he wanted some miracle done. He wanted like a piece of equipment done by the end of the day, and I lost it. you know, and I just was like, yeah, sure, let me pull out my magic wand here and I'll just make that happen. You know, there's nobody in front of you, you know. And in that moment, I saw an expression change, and I saw that I just destroyed this image of what he saw in me. I just destroyed it right there. And you may not ever get it back, but I'll tell you the next step is we're not always going to get it right, and you need to go make it right.
Yeah. Yeah, in that situation, I mean, you probably spent a lot of time building up your credibility, and then it can
Yeah.
get destroyed in a hurry.
Spend, you know, months, years, and then it takes 30 seconds to blow it.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit about the pressure control model. So pressure reveals what's inside of you. Travis was talking about how it reveals your character. It's not always a good thing when you get under pressure. It can be. It can also not be. Probably a good majority of the time if you're under a lot of pressure. You know, a lot of times you feel like there's no other way to respond than just escalate your emotions, and you know, a lot of it is emotional. That's what we're talking about. A lot of it is emotional, and so
I like there where it's talking about how leaders respond.
yeah,
They don't react.
yeah, not reacting.
And then it said, did you see there? It said your emotions set the tone for your whole team.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. Your emotions set the tone for your whole team. If you, as a leader, do react to the situation, so I will say, like in the dealership perspective, we're talking about things. I mean, we both have experience in that situation. A lot of times when, let's say, a customer is frustrated or mad, a lot of times by the time they get to Travis or I, they may have already been through one or two or three people or whatever trying
Yeah.
to talk to, get really frustrated. And so a lot of times by the time they get to us, they're very frustrated. If it's sometimes they had time to calm down, but if it's like in a pretty quick manner, by the time the phone call gets passed to us or they're there in person, they're probably going to be pretty frustrated. And so I do feel like I'm pretty good at being calm, but there are times where if you can help calm the person down and, like Travis mentioned, let them vent a little bit and then show them that you do care enough to listen, but try to let the emotions get out of the way so then you can try to speak rationally. Because I feel like, from my perspective on their experience in dealing with those people, if someone is mad, they get to a certain point, most of the rationality is out the window. Because you can even try to explain stuff to people. I've learned a lot of stuff the hard way. Is if you get into a match of you're reacting and they say, well, you did this, you say, well, I didn't do this, I did that, and you go back and forth and stuff. A lot of times you're never going to win. From the leader perspective, is either the other people on your team see you, like, in a sense, fighting with the customer, or, you know, the customer is never going to actually stop and say, oh, I think you're probably correct. They're not in the moment when they're mad. Maybe when they
No.
calm down. But I'd say, like Travis mentioned, probably most of the time they just need to vent. They're frustrated and you're the first person there. So let them vent a little bit, and then just trying to get the emotional stuff out of the way so that the rational part can kick back in and you can have a intelligent conversation with them.
I was telling you about this one last week, but we had this guy and he called up, man, he'd went through, like Tyler said, went through about 3 managers and got to our general manager, Kelly. And I mean, he just proceeded to go into Kelly, and it was crazy because a lot of people don't realize this about lawn and garden, but we get most of our service equipment, like the majority of it, in about 5 months out of the year. And so for our listeners that don't live in lawnmower world like me and Tyler, or ag world, if you need your lawnmower worked on, it's a good time to get that done, is like October through February.
But when is the time that people usually do it?
Exactly. Right in the middle of all chaos.
Yeah.
And then when they come in, they're like, I got to have it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. You know, my yard, it died right in the middle of mowing. And it's hard to get people to realize, but you're saying, hey, I'm not trying to be mean here, but you got to come to the realization that there's 80 lawnmowers ahead of you.
Yeah, we had one recently where a guy had talked about he had a problem for months since last winter, and he's talking about he didn't have time to get it into us. So it kind of kicks back into what we previously talked about it really wasn't a priority for him.
You got it. Yeah, like from last week.
But yeah, and it then it got to the point where, like, you know, now it's a big problem because it's been sitting around for 5 or 6 months, and the problem has escalated.
Yeah, because now his yard's growing, so now it's a priority. And so this guy gets in and gets a hold of Kelly, and I mean, he's just going on and on and on and using all kind of obscenities and stuff. And, you know, and then he said, I got to have that mower fixed by this weekend so I can mow the church property. So Kelly proceeded to ask what church that was. He said, why do you want to know? He said, well, I thought I'd just call and visit with your pastor and let him know how this conversation was going here on the phone. And of course, the guy got mad and he hangs up, but I was thinking as we were talking that when you're under pressure, that reveals what's inside you, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think with the whole way we're trying to talk about, look at things with faith, business, and legacies. It's not three separate things. They're all together. Talking about, Travis had mentioned that John Maxwell was talking about the being a Christian leader in business. You can't really separate that stuff. And so I think you don't want to be the person where you're like, well, I'm going to church on Sunday, but Monday I'm going to get in arguments with people, or I'm going to let my emotions take control of things and just flip the switch back and forth. You got to work on that to be your person, no matter what situation you're in, no matter what pressure you're under, to be who you are. I know my mom has told me this here. She kind of has to remind me of this when I talk to her. Sometimes I vent to her about things that have happened, but it's hard for me not to take things personally a lot of times. And so if stuff happens, sometimes stuff just happens and it's not personal. But if I'm taking it personal, and I think, man, I'd just like to do this, I'd like to get mad back at the person or whatever, the situation that's going on. But she points out to me and has to remind me, you need to be who you are, no matter the circumstances, no matter the situation that you're in. Be who you are. Let your character shine and basically be a good Christian person no matter what. You can only control yourself, and it doesn't really matter the circumstances or the situations or the other people what they're pushing you to do. You can only control your emotions and actions.
Well, the old saying is you can't see the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're making these decisions, and sometimes they're pretty important decisions based off how we feel in that moment.
Yep.
And I'm just going to encourage you to step away, take a deep breath, think about it, and then come back to it, especially like when you're dealing with your kids. It's real easy to be like, would you shut up in there, and that's not the response we want. And so you want to think, wait a minute, he wasn't thinking through what he did, and I need to explain this to him, but we see it through our lens and our perspective. And we want to make sure that our decisions are being controlled under pressure and we're not making them on emotion. So
yep.
I want to jump into the FBL. That's our faith, business, and legacy. That's our strategy for success. And faith, are you anchored or reactive? So anchored would be like, I didn't just start reading my Bible when a problem arose, right? So I've been reading my Bible, I've been studying it, and I think when a problem arises, there's a lot of times, I may not have time for a full prayer meeting, but I can bow my head and say, God, help me respond to this in the right way. Be with me in this decision, that kind of things. Or am I reactive by, I need to go making a few apologies because of the way that my emotions pushed me,
I think if you do spend time with God, you are anchored in the Word of God through the Bible and through prayer. There's a lot of times that when that situation, that pressure arises, you do have a better sense of the right decision to make in the situation because you are anchored in God's Word.
Absolutely. Business, your team mirrors your emotional control. If I call employee in here and I'm thinking, what are you thinking, you knucklehead? I can't believe you did that. You drove the forklift through the side of the building. Well, you got to be, one of the dumbest people I've ever seen, So then I get mad at this person for doing that same thing with a fellow employee or another customer, right? Yeah. They're mirroring your emotions. So we've had situations, and I know you have too. Every week you got problems you got to deal with, you got to work through, and it's just like, man, come in here and let's talk about this. So this is the problem. This is how you probably should have handled this. And there's been days where I might take a day before I handle the problem, right? Because I want to make sure that I'm handling them in the right way. So let's talk our last one here. So we did faith, business. Now let's talk legacy. Your family feels the pressure before they hear your words, right? So you come home, you're stressed, the emotions are high. They can feel it too. And then your words don't make it better when you jump in the middle of it and say, hey, and I think too, like dealing with customers, you were talking earlier how that's emotionally driven. But also, think about where this person's coming from. If you're out in the middle of your yard and it's 100 degrees and your lawnmower broke, and maybe it's the second time it's broke or whatever, you're probably not going to be real happy either. And so put your person in that shoe, and put you in that person's shoes, right? So
Yeah.
think about how you would respond, and then make a controlled decision.
Yep. That's good. Well, think about, so we have a couple questions to ponder on. Think about what triggers you. What are some of the things that causes you to get frustrated or flustered or causes stress for you, pressure, whatever that may be. But what are some of those triggers? And where do you lose control? So think about what causes that, what are your triggers, and then where do you lose control? Often stemming from those triggers.
Yeah, and I think once you can identify them, you may not like this, but like Tyler saying, hey, you're good at influencing, that was a positive. But people around you can probably tell you where your triggers are. Maybe your spouse, maybe your brother. But ask those people around you, help me identify these, but be ready for it.
Well, and just like, kind of like Moses in the same sense as he had a power to influence people, but he made a bad decision and it cost him drastically. So yes, you can influence people, but it's a blessing and a curse, I guess, if you want to say it like that. So making sure that you make the controlled decisions and not just let your emotions run rampant.
I think too, that goes back to what we've been talking about for the whole month with discipline too. If you're the guy trying to handle everything, it makes that making a practical decision makes it even harder.
Yeah.
Because you got to be able to have yourself disconnected at least a step away from the problem so that you can look at it and make a rational decision.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to our challenge. So this goes back to those questions. Identify your top emotional trigger. What is it? Something that really triggers you emotionally, that a lot of times it'll be a common thing that happens over and over. And pre-plan your response before it happens again. So this goes back into being a little proactive here and thinking about, you can probably the easiest way would be reflect on some of the situations. Like if you had, let's say one trigger happened to you 3 times, you probably reacted maybe 3 different ways, and you could think back, okay, which one had the most positive outcome? Or maybe none of them had a positive outcome. Maybe you should think about it a little bit more and come up with the good response so that you think it'll have the most positive outcome and reduce the amount of conflict and the pressure.
So guys, we've been talking about emotional control under pressure, and we want not only want to lay this out, but just encourage you that we struggle with these same things too. And we're going to be in prayer for our listeners, and we want to grow together. And we've laid it out. We've given the challenge, and now it's time.
Now it's time to execute.
Strategies for success. We lead, we build, we bless. Faith in the fight, a vision inside. A legacy is our quest. Strategies for success. With courage we invest. Faith, business, legacy. That's our strategy for success.